Welcome back into the College Football Every Game on the Board podcast, part number 5 with our closer, Rob Veno, at Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. We are going 193-194 UAB UTSA down to the end of the card here to finish it out wherever you're downloading your podcasts at. Every Game on the Board. Without further ado, Rob Veno, welcome in, buddy. How you feeling?
I'm good this week, Drew. How about yourself? We got a lot of football, boy. I think you mentioned it last week, 49 days in a row with a football game on for us to see.
Yeah.
And you and I had a little discussion about, Conference USA making the decision to be on Tuesday, Wednesday nights. I think it's great. You get to see teams, for the folks out there that don't pay attention all the time, you get to see teams that you never see. And last night was a good example of a couple of games where, Jerry Kill in New Mexico State, right? What's better than seeing that on a Wednesday night, Drew?
Oh, absolutely. It's great stuff, man. I think it's a really smart marketing idea by Conference USA. And hey, speaking of Conference USA, we got UAB UTSA to start us off here, guys. 8 p.m. This one on Saturday. Actually, this is Sunbelt, isn't it? It's not Conference USA. I made a mistake there, but we got 67.5 being the total and -9. That's the Roadrunners at home. Rob, you liking anything in with Trent Dilfer in the crew here on the road?
Well, here's how quickly things change, Drew, because it's not CUSA and it's not the Sunbelt. It's the American, AAC. Right? It's the AAC now. It's crazy. Seeing these teams in that conference is kind of crazy. I always have to take a second look, realizing that last week UTSA and Temple was actually a conference game with no divisions anymore in this league. So it's just like a 13-team free-for-all up there. But this should be a really good game. Now, last week I referenced it just a second ago. The UTSA Temple game last week became a shootout, which Texas San Antonio did win. And it was maybe a sign of things to come, Drew, because I think we started this season with UTSA and especially quarterback Frank Harris to be to do really, really well this year. But they didn't start off that way offensively, and Harris got injured and he missed a couple of games. And then they had a bye week last week or the week before last, but then he came back against Temple and looked like the Frank Harris of old. And I get that Temple's defense is horrendous, but Frank Harris off the turf toe, off the, nearly a month absence, came back, was 25 of 33, 338 yards, 3 TDs, no picks, 10.2 yards per attempt. So every time he threw the ball, they gained 10.2 yards. And he had a couple of touchdowns outside the red zone. I think the explosiveness from that Roadrunners offense was seen last week. Again, it is Temple. Got to take it with a grain of salt, but there's not a lot of good defenses in this particular league. So for down the stretch, I think maybe we're going to see the UTSA offense pick up. But as good as that was, their defense was horrendous. Temple put the ball up. Kurt Warner's son, EJ, the quarterback at Temple, put the ball up 65 times last week. Only got sacked once. I think, Drew, the perception that we've had the past few years of UTSA is they're kind of a rugged team and they're good on defense as far as, CUSA teams were concerned, but not the case here. 65 attempts, only 1 sack. Temple racks up 542 total yards, well over 400 through the air. Again, in a shootout. Boy, I don't know. I like the points here in this game with UAB. One thing I've noticed out of UAB the past couple of games is they're developing a toughness at the line of scrimmage. I think they match up really, really well here, Drew. And I just revert back real quick to the Tulane game where I watched UAB, their offensive line, uproot Tulane's defense for about 2.5 quarters and run the football on them when they wanted to. They made some crucial mistakes in that game that cost them in the end, but they played really well, came back last week, played well again. Jacob Zeno, the quarterback, hitting 75.5% of his passes. The running back duo of Brown Jr. and Jacobs. Jacobs didn't play last week, but they expect him back here. It's a pretty well-rounded team. And for this league, I think it's a pretty good team. So I would look to take points with UAB in this contest, which should be pretty good. Could be a shootout. But the odds makers are pricing us out of these totals, Drew. These numbers are getting huge right now.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And Rob, coming in, guys, I was running behind, so kind of flustered at the start of this part five. As we're moving around, by the way, as you've probably noticed if you're watching live, going at 3:30, we usually go at 5 here with Rob as our closer. But just saying that we're in the Sun Belt or Conference USA, whatnot. And I'm looking at AAC to kind of double check myself. And of course, they are both in the AAC. But when you look at like UTSA, UAB, like I've been to UAB and to look at that program and like the facilities and the stadium, and then you go to some of these other schools in the AAC, like Tulane, like SMU, it's almost like that is a wide gap of in the AAC of like I don't know if they're going to really be able over the long term teams like UAB to really be punching up in class like that. Rob, I almost like would look to maybe fade him long term, but I know it's more like a game by game. But doesn't it seem like that to you? It's almost like Vanderbilt to Georgia. It is a pretty wide gap.
Yeah, because you could throw in Memphis, which
Yeah.
probably has really good facilities. And then you have the contrast, which even worse is like Temple, Drew, which has zero facilities whatsoever. How they stay, but it's all about recruiting, and maybe Trent Dilfer can bring stuff in through the portal. I think he's playing an exciting brand of football. UTSA, let's give them credit for what they've done in a short period of time to even make this jump to the AAC. They become that type of program. So they're going to have to keep building, to your point, to get to where the SMUs, the Memphises, the Tulanes are. But then again, Tulane was not in great shape a few years ago prior to their upgrade in facilities and new stadium and whatnot. So we'll see how they do. But I think it's a competitive league at this point for sure.
Yeah, it can change quickly. That's a good point too. Tulane, I mean, like FAU schools like that are really growing, Robbie. Next game up, UL Monroe, Texas State, Bobcats minus 16-64 as I'll fix my camera.
What a brutal loss for Texas State last week, Drew, and a team that, again, first-year head coach G.J. Kinney comes from Incarnate Word, takes over this program, and I don't know that a ton was expected, but a ton has been delivered in a short period of time here, especially by the quarterbacks, ex-SEC guys. We talk about them every week during this segment, but T.J. Finley, and, of course, Malik Hornsby from Arkansas. Last week, they go to UL Lafayette, and they have the lead the whole game. They're winning 30-21 in the fourth. They give up a touchdown, 30-28. They can't move the ball in their final drive. They go to punt from their own 35 and get it blocked with 2 minutes left. ULL recovers on the 22-yard line, goes 22 yards for a touchdown, and wins that game 34-30, a game that they were really never in the lead in. So it was a tough loss for Texas State. But I think it shows at this point in time, Drew, how quickly they've made the climb in the Sun Belt. And I wouldn't be surprised if they go out and destroy UL Monroe here. However, you always have to take a look at their defense, and I'm not in the habit of laying 16 with a team that can't play a heck of a lot of defense. And UL Monroe under Terry Bowden just seems to be a seesaw type of team. 1 week really good, 1 week destroyed, 1 week surprise, 1 week destroyed. I don't know what they bring this week, but they probably are able to score here against Texas State, and I have no doubt Texas State's going to rack up a whole bunch of points here. I mean, that offense was dynamic again. This one is probably priced in a range where I could get to the over. Open 62, got the 64, as compared to some of these other ones we're going to talk about that are 68 or 70. This one might be well in range for Texas State and UL Monroe to get over the number.
Like it, Robbie. Next game up, BYU, TCU. We're seeing the Horned Frogs minus 5.5 or minus 6 right now as the home favorite. 52.5 being the total. Big 12 conference here. The newcomer, BYU at TCU. You like it anything in Fort Worth?
Yeah, this is a weird game for me, Drew, because, and again, I don't know how you feel about these two teams, but I can't make heads or tails out of either one at this point in time. There's a point in time where I thought BYU was going to be strictly a low-scoring defensive style team. Maybe we can get some unders. Then they start putting up points, and I'm thinking, well, now they're going fast, and maybe they'll be an over team. They win some, they lose some. They're very, very hard to gauge on a week-to-week basis, and that could be the jump into the Big 12 here. That could be part of the reason for it. TCU, the same thing. TCU looked like they got on track. Then they take a loss. TCU is the better team. Athletically, I think there's the superior team as far as speed goes. And in college football, speed means so much. But I don't like the way they play defense, to tell you the truth. And I just go back to the Arkansas game with BYU, where if you look at those two teams size-wise, it really looked like Arkansas should have dominated Brigham Young, but they didn't. BYU won that game and scored 38 points against that team. So I don't know that, the physicality is if that there's a significant margin between these teams as maybe I had thought by looking at them. The quarterback play is going to be rough because TCU has lost their starting quarterback here. But I don't know that there's a lot of separation between their top two either. I think if push came to shove, I would probably look to over in this game, Drew. It's priced in a range at 52.5, where a 30-24 type game gets you a win. And I have a little more faith in both offenses than I do defenses of these two teams at this point in time.
All right, Robbie, 7:00 in Baton Rouge. Next game up here, Auburn at LSU. Big one in the SEC here. Battle of Tigers, or Tagas, War Eagles, however you want to go with this. 61 being the total. We get -11. There is a -11 in the hook out there. That's the Bayou Bengals is the home favorite. You liking anything Auburn and LSU?
I think I would take a flyer with Auburn here, Drew, plus 11 points. LSU, the facts are in on this team, right? They cannot play defense whatsoever, which probably helps Auburn a little bit because they're not a good offensive team. But against a defense like this, they should be able to score a little bit more than they've scored so far this season. You would expect their offense to come around as the season goes on, get a little better, incrementally better. LSU has been hanging 500. I think they've had over 500 yards in 6 straight games now, including last week's game against Missouri. But Auburn could be the best defense they've seen in a few weeks here. And so all that being said, when I put that together, and LSU coming off what was a pretty dramatic win against Missouri. I mean, that game, it ended up as a 10-point deficit or a margin or a victory if you're on the LSU side, deficit for Missouri. But it wasn't really a 10-point game at all. Missouri was in the lead quite a bit. LSU couldn't stop them offensively. It took a couple of, again, when you talk about games like that, you say the one team that can make a stop. LSU was the team that made a stop. They got a couple of picks. That's what led to the victory in the end. I think Auburn defensively is good enough to stick within 11 here in a conference game where maybe maybe LSU will come out a little flat off of that Missouri game. So for me, 11 looks to be a little bit too much. I would like Auburn in that game.
I like hearing that, Rob. It's always tough for me to handicap the Auburn side, but I was thinking the same thing, off of the bye week. And you bring up a good point with the defenses LSU has faced. I mean, you could make the argument all the way back to game number 1, FSU would be the only defense. Yeah, I guess it's kind of close with teams like Arkansas, maybe Mississippi State, but yeah, hey, maybe if you want to take a shot here with the Auburn Tigers. However, they are on the road. Tough place to play there in Baton Rouge. Iowa and Wisconsin up next here, Robbie. 4:00 on Saturday. 34.5 being the total, down to 34 at some shops, which is a full field goal down from the opener. So 34 being the total. We get Wisconsin -9.5 point favorite. You liking anything in Camp Randall jumping around?
Well, I could tell you what I don't like, and that would be Iowa with Deacon Hill at quarterback. 6 of 21 last week. Cade McNamara out for the season. Iowa goes to the backup, 6 of 21 for 110 yards. I mean, Iowa just cannot move the football whatsoever. So, you look at that, and the same kind of thing existed in the Penn State game, Drew, when Iowa went to Penn State. And I forget what the number was there, but it was bigger than this, maybe 17, 18, whatever that number was. And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I was going to play one of those 24-10 games. Maybe it was 14.5, because I remember thinking I was going to play one of those 24-10 games where they gain 100 yards on offense, but yet they cover the spread. That's kind of what you're looking at here. But I don't know that Iowa, they didn't cover that game. They lost 31-0. And I feel like they're so bad offensively that they're not worth looking at as a +10 underdog anymore. Wisconsin, to their credit, when you bring in Phil Longo and you bring in Tanner Mordecai and you do the shift from barbaric offense to modern day offense, it's going to take a little bit of time, even though they've got the players, the personnel there. As the season wears on, I would expect Phil Longo's offense to be better. Wisconsin has all the explosiveness in this game. Iowa has none. If Tanner Mordecai doesn't make mistakes, I don't see any reason why they can't win this game by more than 10. I mean, quite honestly, does 17-3 sound out of the question in this game? Probably not. And Wisconsin would cover at that number.
3-0 doesn't seem like out of the question. It's funny to see the 34 as the total, even as low as 33.5 here. I'm seeing pop up. So yeah, really low scoring game there in the Big Ten. We'll head to the SEC up next, kicking us off on Saturday, 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Alabama hosting Arkansas. Crimson Tide minus 20-point home favorites, 47 being the total here.
Yeah, I don't know that I want to lay that many points with Alabama's offense, Drew. And I know the defense really has turned it on this year. But again, with KJ Jefferson, the capability for Arkansas to get to 13 points is there. In that case, you have to get 34 out of Alabama. If you want to cover, if you want to bet that team minus 20. And I do understand, Arkansas hasn't shown anything on defense. I just talked about BYU scoring 38 against them this year, and they've given up points along the way in a lot of cases. But when they've stepped up in class, and if you look at the A&M game, right, Texas A&M, a very good defensive team, pretty much shut Alabama down last week, even though they lost. Arkansas's in that game the entire way. They lose 38-22 or 34-22, which is a 12-point loss to Texas A&M, certainly well under the 20 they're getting here. I just think it's too much for an Alabama team to cover, an Alabama team that's still struggling to find any semblance of offense. They didn't show any last week. One more time, quarterback play is mediocre at best. Things could get better, and, they could maybe get 5 turnovers and win the game by 4 touchdowns, but I wouldn't take my chances there. I'd probably look at Arkansas plus 20 points. It seems very heavy to me, that number.
205, 206 up next, Robbie, as we're going down in rotation order, guys. Also a 12 noon Eastern kick here. North Texas laying 6 points as the home favorite, 70 being the total. We're talking Temple, the Owls at the North Texas Mean Green. You liking anything in Denton, Texas, Robbie?
You could almost take everything I say about Texas State and apply it to North Texas, except that I think Texas State has a little bit better quarterback play with Finley and Hornsby than does North Texas. But it's the same thing. We're talking about air raid offenses without a lot of defense. They score at will, and they give it up at will. And for E.J. Warner, as I said earlier, he threw the ball 65 times last week. He may not throw it 65 times this week, but the game's going to be played at incredible pace. Both of these teams go fast. The yardage should be easy to gain on both sides. That's why we're staring at 70. And I said earlier, they're pricing us out of some of these totals. 70 looks scary. But then again, for North Texas to win this thing 42-31 or something, when I start putting final scores in my head, I think, you know what, you could still probably make 70 here. I would not want to be on under in this game because I do think it'll go back and forth. And when Warner has time to throw, because the offensive line is like a sieve, and I don't know that North Texas is going to apply a ton of pressure on E.J. Warner, but when he's got time to throw and their offense can get into their pass patterns, just like last week against much better defense in Texas San Antonio than what North Texas brings to the table, they showed they can score points. So, if you have to, you want to look at over. If you don't have to, you just leave this game alone.
Another early kick up next in Nashville, Tennessee, 12 noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. Georgia and Vanderbilt, 56 being the total, Rob. We're seeing Georgia -1 or -31.5. That's the Bulldogs as the quote-unquote road favorite. But keep in mind, guys, they got all that construction there at Vanderbilt home stadium. There's a lot of Bulldogs fans already in Nashville. It's not a long drive. There will be a lot of Georgia in the stands. And, Robbie, I got a stat for you. These two teams play in the SEC East together. They play each other every year. It's been 5 years since Vanderbilt has scored a touchdown against Georgia. Oh, man, 5 years staying out of the end zone. Hey, give me Georgia here, minus the 31.5, Rob. How do you feel?
I would agree. The only trepidation I would have with Georgia is so much was put into that last week's game against Kentucky. Kentucky came in there pounding their chest. National media made a big deal out of, oh, here comes Kentucky 5-0. Georgia hasn't looked good all year long. And all of a sudden that offense broke out. Georgia hadn't played offense like that all season long. And they scored, and then they scored, and then they scored again. And Kentucky never scored. Kentucky went home basically in a body bag after that game. And now you go to Vanderbilt as a 31-point favorite. Do they come out with that same focus, with that same energy? That would be my only question here, Drew, because I've liked nothing about Vanderbilt all season long. I know you and I talked preseason. Clark Lee, this team, we thought they were on the rise. They've disappointed at every turn. Ken Seals, the backup quarterback, but a veteran quarterback, hasn't been able to produce since A.J. Swan went down. The one thing Vandy was able to do with Swan was score some points, but the defense has been brutal. I don't know. For me, I'd have to stand in your corner and say it's Georgia or nothing. I would just be a little bit concerned about their focus level. And maybe they can sleepwalk through a game and win by 31 against Vanderbilt, a team that, as you mentioned, hasn't scored on them in 5 years. That's hard to believe. 5 years without a touchdown.
Oh, absolutely, right. And you do bring up good points. I mean, anytime you're laying more than 30 points, if the team doesn't show up. Plus, I was, before I made the bet, I was watching Kirby Smart in his press conference, and he was talking like very highly of Clark Lee. So if it gets to like, they're up 28 late in the fourth and you got a Georgia ticket, that's probably not looking good. They're not going to look to pour it on again. So yeah, I do got to say that, granted, don't go big on it, but I do like, I did bet on Georgia minus 31.5, guys. We got 4 games left here. Rob Veno, the closer for the podcast, fan favorite here, Robbie. Follow him on Twitter at Rob Veno Sports. We got Kansas and Oklahoma State up next, Rob. 55.5 being the total, -3. That's the Jayhawks as the road favorite.
All right, so the quarterback situation for both of these teams is the big story of the week in this game, right? We won't get Jalen Daniels again for Kansas, but we do get Jason Bean. Go back to the North Texas days with Jason Bean. And he's very capable. He's proven time in, time out, he's capable of running this offense. So there's a drop off, but it's nothing to get talked off of Kansas for. But what you could get talked off of Kansas for is Alan Bowman, ex-quarterback of Texas Tech, who has now been officially named the starter at Oklahoma State after playing well last week. I don't know what Mike Gundy generally gets the right quarterback in as his starter. I don't think he got the right guy out of the chute here this year. Now I think he does have the right guy, Bowman. And Oklahoma State looked a little more dynamic last week. It's interesting to follow their season, Drew, with all the controversy surrounding that program and the NIL stuff and the fact that, we might have a bunch of guys jump in the portal after using up their 4 games of eligibility and then moving on somewhere else and keep that year of eligibility. It didn't happen. And Oklahoma State showed some fight last week. So for somebody like myself who thought that potentially Oklahoma State could be a team I could fade the remainder of the year, it seems like they're now playing with a purpose again. And with the best quarterback they have on the roster at the helm, Kansas is not a fantastic defense by any means. I could see a ton of points in this game, especially with Bowman at quarterback for Oklahoma State. So I'd probably either look OSU at home plus the points, or I would look over the total. One of those two would be my choices.
I'm picking up what you're laying down there, Robbie. Bowman, he was good when he was the starter at Texas Tech, and I'm with you. I don't think Kansas. Obviously Jalen Daniels, their old quarterback, was really, really good, but their backup Bean, he's a very good backup quarterback. So I could see some points as well. We got Kansas State and Texas Tech staying in the Big 12. Red Raiders -1.5 point home favorites, 56.5 being the total in Lubbock.
Yeah, this is a good game, Drew. And Kansas State took an L last week. They become a little bit human in the Big 12. However, I think they've made a bit of a change in personality that maybe doesn't get noticed or picked up right away by odds makers and public money. And by that, I mean that, at Kansas State, we think of Bill Snyder and even the new head coach there from North Dakota State. You're thinking that they're very fundamentally sound. They run the football. They do this, they do that. They play low scoring games, but it's not the case with K-State anymore. I don't like their defense. Missouri ran roughshod through that defense. But I do love their offense. I have to say, offensively, they're as dynamic as they've been in quite some time. And I look at a total like this against Texas Tech, and I think, man, that's, again, Kansas State is priced too low. Kansas State is more apt nowadays to play a game in the 30s than they are a game in the low 20s. Just the fact where they're at this point in time. The difference here, real quick, Joey McGuire's Texas Tech team, boy, there's a couple of times this year when they've been energized and the defense looks way better than I've ever seen a Texas Tech defense. It doesn't show up on a weekly basis, so they're not consistent enough yet for me to think they're a really good defensive team. And I do think Kansas State, their offense overrides any success that the Texas Tech defense could have here. So I'm thinking, Drew, 56.5 is too low. I think this game, 57 is a key number, 58 is a key number, 59 is a key number. When you're betting totals, all three of those count. A lot of final scores fall on those numbers. I think at this price, if you like over, which I do, you're supposed to go grab it right now.
Guys, we got 2 games left here, 2 good ones to finish off the every game on the board slate. And just a quick shout out to our friends at Viva Tequila Seltzer, sponsor of the Every Game on the Board podcast, the ultimate go-to for toasting those winning picks. Only 88 calories, 0 carbs, 0 sugar, 4.5% ABV. Viva, the perfect match for celebrating those victories. Check them out, vivatequilaseltzer.com. Get them shipped to your house. Rob, we got the nightcap for the Saturday night slate here. We're heading to the island. San Diego State at Hawaii, -6. That's what we're seeing. The Aztecs as the road favorite, 53.5 being the total. The get back game, the degenerate special, whatever we're calling it here, Robbie. If somebody needs a bet on Saturday night, do you like anything San Diego State, Hawaii?
Yeah, it's the game where here on the East Coast, Drew, we're waiting until 3:30 for the final score, 3:30 in the morning. And there's a game in London starting at 9:30. So the amount of rest when you live on the East Coast and watch these things is limited at best. I'd love to say Hawaii at home here because San Diego State is not quite up to the level that they've played at in recent years, but neither is Hawaii at this point in time. I thought Timmy Chang's team would be a little bit better, especially on the offensive side. However, all that being said, there's been subtle changes to the San Diego State team with Maiden at quarterback, where they've actually picked up the pace a little bit and they've shown the ability to score against lesser defenses, which Hawaii is. This game is priced like a San Diego State total would always be priced, 53.5, not very many points here. I could see this game getting over the number. However, if I had to trust something more than another thing in this game, I would trust the San Diego State defense to be able to contain Hawaii. So for that reason, I think the best, if I wind up playing this game, Drew, and sweating it out till 3:30 a.m. East Coast time, I'll probably be on San Diego State -5.5 here because generally speaking, you're afraid that they're not good enough to score enough to cover numbers for you, especially on the road. But I think right now that offense has made, like I say, some subtle changes where they probably are good enough against this defense to get themselves to, I don't know, the required point total here might be 30 to cover 6 against Hawaii. So I think San Diego State's at a point where they can do that.
At Rob Veno Sports on Twitter. Guys, we got USC, Notre Dame to end it. We'll get a best bet from Robbie as well. Huge shout out to the chat box, everybody watching us live on YouTube, Twitter as well. We got Keith Landry letting us know, head coach Timmy Chang, it's his birthday this week, so maybe a little birthday play there for Hawaii. We got DDB in the house saying Viva Las Vegas. I like it, man. Keith also letting us know he likes the Oklahoma quarterback for sure. We were talking about that. Sonny saying Georgia also has a bye next week. Keep that in mind against Vanderbilt there. DDB, he's not liking the Iowa play calling, I believe. He could make Caleb Williams look bad. So some funny stuff here in the chat box, guys. Like always, let us know what you think, where you agree, where you disagree. All is welcome in the comments below on YouTube and wherever you're downloading your podcast at. Every Game on the Board. Robbie, last game to end it here. 215, 216, USC, the Trojans at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Minus 2.5. There are minus threes at some shops. Pretty much a split line right now, Robbie. 2.5 or 3. So make sure to shop around, guys, depending which side you like. 60 being the total. I like the Irish, Robbie. I really do. I think they win this game at home. I bet them. What do you like here in South Bend, Indiana?
I think there's a couple of reasons to like your side, Drew. First off, that Louisville loss last week has to stick with Notre Dame heading into this one, which has long been a rivalry. I know this game disappeared for a few years, but they brought it back, and Notre Dame USC is always a game where you can expect full motivation, full focus, 100% effort out of both sides. And I think you'll get that and then some out of Notre Dame off the loss last week. Secondly, USC just hasn't run into a defense at all this season like this Notre Dame defense. And I'm interested to see if Caleb Williams and company can't run out there and throw up 4 touchdowns in their first 6 possessions, what they're going to do, especially if they have to play from behind here. We haven't seen it. They've been pushed to the brink by lesser foes a couple of times so far this year. So I think Notre Dame is a huge step up in class. Not that USC can't pass this test, but I haven't seen it yet. And from what I've seen, I think Notre Dame defensively is more apt to create trouble for that USC offense. And boy, if that happens, Drew, hey, you don't want the USC defense against Notre Dame's offensive line, physicality, running game, et cetera, et cetera. Notre Dame hasn't scored a bunch this year, but against this team, they might be able to. So I think they're, for those 2 reasons, especially, A, the fact that Notre Dame's off a loss and probably very, very angry here. They've probably, in fact, they have played themselves out of any Final Four college football playoff hopes because they have 2 losses now, so that they're out of that competition. So the next best thing is to just finish out the string strong, especially in a rivalry game. I like that aspect, and I do like the aspect of USC trying to penetrate this defense. I don't know if it can be done. Certainly, Notre Dame has seen athleticism, not a well-oiled machine like USC's offense, but they've seen athleticism in the form of Ohio State so far this year. Shut that down. Notre Dame's played a way better schedule. I like Notre Dame. I think they win that game.
Like it, Robbie. Like the breakdown here. We got DDB saying weather in South Bend. I just looked it up real quick, and it looks like there could be rain in the forecast, 10 to 15 mile per hour winds. So something to watch as we get closer. David, let us know. Vanderbilt hasn't lived up to expectations. Yeah, for sure, David. They got a tough one here against the back-to-back national champion Georgia Bulldogs, which we just talked about. Rob, great stuff as always. Throw it over to you. Any final thoughts here for the show, and do you have a best bet for the listeners?
Yeah, final thoughts real quick, Drew. College football season has been sailing along. Actually, at wagertalk.com, I've been the #1 NFL and college football handicapper combined as far as profit produced is concerned since January 1, calendar year. So if you're looking for client selections, go ahead over to wagertalk.com. You can find my page over there each and every day with selections up and available. This week, the college board I've already started. I've got a best bet up and available right now for college football. As far as this show, Drew, let's start with this for a best bet. Best bet is that Kirk Ferentz won't fire his kid from being offensive play caller. I mean, I get what the guy was saying to us. Cade McNamara was nobody's any good with Brian Ferentz calling the plays, or anybody who's called plays at Iowa the last 20 years. So, but Kirk Ferentz isn't going to fire his kid, so Deacon Hill is not going to perform against the Wisconsin D. But let's get into a game selection. We started with it. It's an underdog play that I think can win outright. I like UAB. Plus 9 points against UTSA. It just seems like way too much. I think these teams are way more even talent-wise, Drew, than this line would suggest. After watching, what UAB's shown me the last couple of weeks, there's a certain physicality about them. And Trent Dilfer, be what he is, he's actually bringing this team along really well. They play at a high tempo. Boy, when you give Temple 65 pass attempts and you can only get to their quarterback one time, that's a red flag for me on the UTSA defense. So I'm going to try UAB plus 9 here. Best bet for this show. It'll be on my card on Saturday. So let's go Blazers.
Like it, Rob. All right, UAB Blazers. And actually, Rob, we can give you plus 9.5 available at a couple shops right now. So get that extra hook on the 9. Rob Veno bringing the heat as always here, guys. That's going to do it for part number 5, wherever you're downloading your podcast at. Every game on the board. We'll have Beating the Bookie on in just a second for part number 4. So stay with us. Rob, thanks as always, man. Have a fun, safe weekend, and have fun in Las Vegas next week, man.
Yeah, it'll be a good time, Drew. I'll be back with you 2 weeks from now. So good luck this weekend to everybody. Thanks for tuning in, and enjoy the week.
Absolutely, Rob. Have a good one, bud. We'll talk in 2 weeks. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. Smash that like button, comment below. Cash